the fifth book, as you see here in the History of Redemption series, the promise of the eternal covenant. The promise of the eternal covenant. And this book is covering the third period of Jesus' genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. And we have studied the first period, second period, third period. Each period has how many generations? Do you remember? 14 generations. 14, 14, 14. We're at the last 14 generations. And this last 14 generations is from the deportation to Babylon all the way to Jesus Christ. And this is a very important time period because this is what we call, in biblical term or theological term, intertestamental period. In between the Old Testament and the New Testament. It's a transition time. And world history-wise, do you believe that the world history is within God's redemptive history? What is bigger? World history bigger or God's redemptive history bigger? A lot of people think world history bigger, and then within there's Christian history, Jewish history, there's redemptive history. But we believe God's redemption work embraces everything. And within that comes all the events that happen in this world and all the events that happen even in the universe. And all within God's redemptive plan. Do you believe that? And so one message that the author is trying to convey from the Bible through this book is that even if you feel like you're under the influence of this corrupt world, corrupt regime of darkness, you're stuck in this world and in your situation and you just cannot get out of it. Even then, remember, you're under God's redemptive work. You're within the boundaries of God's work. And so that is the message that we are going to try to convey today. So if you do get the main message, you do? Then you can go home. You don't have to spend 2 hours explaining in long detail to get you the message. That's basically the message. But for those of you who are curious, you can stay. And the first hour I'm going to share with you about the prophecy in the book of Daniel through 3 different chapters, chapter 2, chapter 7, and chapter 8. Chapter 2 has a big statue. Head is gold, breast and arms of silver, belly and thighs of bronze, and the leg of iron, and that statue. And then there are 2 kinds of 2 chapters describing different kinds of beasts, but prophesying about same thing. So we're going to talk about that, and in the second hour, Dr. Tan Mei Ling will be sharing about the return from Babylon. Right? I got it right? About the return. The three returns from Babylon. So this prophecy is given to Daniel while he was in captivity. Right? Now, captivity, good thing or bad thing? Bad thing, right? It feels like it's a curse. It feels like it's punishment. You're going through that punishment of 70 years. But even in the midst of that, God spoke through people like Daniel, Ezekiel, the different prophets, and gave them hope. I'm still with you. Even though you're away from Jerusalem, even though you're suffering under different world powers, I'm still with you, and I still remember my promise to you. You will return. And so today's prophecy is not only about that return and that covenant salvation, but God spoke through Daniel. It's amazing because Daniel and Ezekiel, they were both in captivity in Babylon when they received this revelation, right? And these two revelations, Ezekiel's prophecy and especially the vision of the heavenly temple, and Daniel's prophecies, are not only about the mere return from Babylon to Jerusalem, but they are both about the end time. Have some kind of relationship with Revelation. See how interesting it is? They feel like they were being punished because of their sins, but that is the time in the midst of the greatest, darkest period of their history. God gives the brightest revelation. And so take opportunity. If you're going through some dark period of your life, that might be the time when God will give you the brightest revelation. That's when they receive the greatest revelation all the way about the end time, even about the second coming and the judgment. So if anybody is going through difficulties right now, please believe and have hope. God is with you. And even in that difficulty, actually through that difficulty, God will give you even greater understanding and revelation, and God will confirm with you that He is right beside you. Amen. So, without further, we're still worshiping, which is good. But let's turn to Daniel chapter 2. Let us begin from verse 31. Verse 31. We will read a few verses and then we'll explain. This is actually a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar dreamt. And remember, he forgot his dream. And he had all these wise men come and told them, if you don't remember my dream on behalf of me, I will kill you and your family. And all these wise men were terrified, and Daniel said, don't you worry, because only God, if this is a dream that God gave him, God can reveal it, and only God can interpret it. So, Daniel is telling the king, this is a dream you had, right? And he says, you, O king, were looking, and behold, there was a single great statue. That statue, which was large and of extraordinary splendor, was standing in front of you, and its appearance was awesome. The head of that statue was made of fine gold, its breast and its arms of silver, and its belly and its thighs of bronze, and its legs of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. You continued looking until a stone was cut out without hands, and it struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and crushed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were crushed all at the same time and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away so that not a trace of them was found. But the stone that struck the statue became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. So, we have, please excuse the wiggly lines. We have the head of gold. Is this big enough for you to see? Head of gold. And the next verse 36 and 37. This was a dream. Now we will tell its interpretation before the king. You, O king, are the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, the strength, and the glory. And wherever the sons of men dwell, the beasts of the field, or the birds of the sky, he has given them into your hand and has caused you to rule over them all. You are the head of gold. So this is an interpretation directly given by Daniel, and he says, Babylon, you are the head of gold. Okay. And next is breast and arms of silver. Next nation that comes around in the transitions of world history is Mede Persia. Babylon, if you have a chance to go see any a museum, these museum artifacts do travel around because some museums do rent them out, or I don't know what the right wording is, but they do borrow from museum to museum. The last time I was in, about 10 years ago, in Berlin, Germany, there is a museum called Pergamus Museum. Artifacts from Pergamum were brought there, and one part was from Babylon, and the whole thing was covered with gold and lion, statues of lion and gold. Babylon was known for gold. They were rich. They conquered basically during that time, basically the majority of the world that they knew back then. And that world, they gathered all the gold and, of course, all the precious jewels and the riches, and they decorated everything with gold. They were known for gold. And when they were conquering the world, they were swift and powerful. And so it was right before them was Assyria. Assyria had conquered, but Assyria was not as powerful and swift as the Babylonians. They thought Assyria would rule forever. But it was a shocking, radical thing that Babylon all of a sudden pushed all the way and destroyed Assyria. And so they thought they were the king of heavens and the earth. So the image is the lion, the king of the jungle, king of the land. And then they thought Babylon would rule forever. So if any worldly power thinks that they will rule forever, we see in history it will not last. Only which kingdom? The heavenly kingdom of God will rule forever. Amen? So, Mede Persia was yet another shocking thing. And they came like, I didn't even write lion yet. Lion is supposed to come here. Sorry. This is chapter 2, by the way. I'm supposed to write it here. Chapter 7 and chapter 8. We will write as we go. Mede Persia is known, they were the first to adopt silver as their monetary unit. Silver coins. So I will explain a little more after we read a little more. Okay? And then comes, it says, belly and thigh. Belly and thighs of bronze, right? And this is speaking about Greece. Greece was very well known for copper smelting skills. And so during that time they had their armors and their things, weapons made of bronze also. And after that comes legs of iron. And of course, speaking about Rome. Now, the legs of iron. When you think about Rome, what do you think about? And when you think about Roman soldier, the image of Roman soldier, what colors do you think about? When you think about Roman soldiers, red, black, and silver, right? But it's not silver, it's iron, right? So, but color-wise, they loved red, and they loved black. And black wool came from, this is yet another study, one of the 7 churches in Revelation. 7 churches of Minor Asia. And you hear about Laodicea. Laodicea. What do you hear? What do you remember about Laodicea? Lukewarm. But it says, although you're small, you're very rich. They were rich. Why? Because they had black wool coming from their region. And the Romans loved black color, just like us Asians. The Romans loved black color, and they loved red. And black wool came from, a lot of black wool came from there. A lot of, we're not studying about Laodicea. So anyway, Romans were known for black, red, and their iron. That's why they were ironclad, very strong army. And they pushed forth with this iron. After Rome, sorry, not to erase. And after Rome comes the feet. And but the feet are a mix of clay and iron, right? So feet. Clay and iron. What do you think? Clay and iron, do they mix? Don't mix very well. Clay is not so strong, iron is strong. This is a mixture of different nations that will come after Rome falls. Okay. From this time until we don't know when. But after that comes another thing, and then in the end comes a stone. Stone cut out without hands. And what is that stone? According to 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 4, that rock, that stone is Jesus Christ. 1 Peter chapter 2 tells us also that Jesus is the stone, the rock. Right? Cut out without hands, meaning it has no human involvement. It has no human help, doesn't need human help, but it's cut out without hands. And it comes and strikes the feet, clay and iron. Okay? Why? Because the clay and iron will be the nations that will exist, that will be there, present, when the stone comes. And when it strikes, all these will fall. The heritages of the world will fall. And that stone will become a mount, will become an everlasting kingdom of God. Let us now skip to Daniel chapter 7. Daniel chapter 7, Daniel sees, verse 2, it says, Daniel said, I was looking in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds of heaven were stirring up the great sea. Where do you see four winds? Revelation. And four great beasts were coming from the sea. In Revelation chapter 13, we see beasts coming up out of the sea. And here it's described in four different ways, and different from one another. The first was like a lion. I, by mistake, explained about lion earlier. Okay, lion with wings of an eagle, right? Okay. So as I was explaining, I had to stop in the middle. Lion, the king of the land. Eagle, the king of the sky. Powerful as lion and as swift and fast because you have the wings of an eagle. And then it says, it was lifted up from the ground and made to stand on 2 feet like a man. Human mind also was given to it. Do you remember Nebuchadnezzar becoming very proud? Right? Like a man. But then God said, because you are proud, because you said, I did, I, you will be like a beast in the field. Right? This is the opposite. Man becoming like beast, but here, beast becoming like man. This is a technique of writing in God's way of writing in the Bible. Right? And behold, another beast, a second one, resembling a bear, and it was raised up on one side, and 3 ribs were in its mouth between its teeth, and thus they said to it, Arise, devour much meat. So bear, with 3 ribs, not his own ribs, but somebody else's ribs in his mouth, right? And on one side. Why is the bear on one side? Have 2 legs, but one side meaning depending on one leg only, right? Mede Persia were 2 nations, Mede and Persia. Mede was Darius, king of Mede was Darius, king of Persia was Cyrus. Darius was Cyrus's uncle. So they said, let's join and conquer together. After they conquered, because uncle is older, they said, uncle, you be the king, you be the emperor. So Cyrus stepped down or stepped aside and let Darius rule. Darius was not a very good king or emperor. He lasted 1 year. Cyrus took over. Cyrus was much smarter, much better in ruling over the nations. And so basically, Mede just kind of got absorbed into Persia, and soon it was only called Persia. Right? And so, leaning on one side. Okay? They, in their conquest, they conquered Lydia, 546 BC, somewhere around there. Okay? 546 BC. And then they conquered Babylon, 539 BC. And then they conquered Egypt, 525 BC. So the 3 big nations, the 3 huge nations that they conquered, the 3 ribs in their mouth. And then verse 6, after this I kept looking, and behold, another one like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. So leopard, It had 4 wings. Leopard is, what's unique about leopards? Fast. What's unique about 4 wings? Faster than 2 wings. Greece conquered, who's the king, who was the leader? Alexander the Great. Right? He started off in his 20s, early 20s. It took him about 10 years to conquer the whole world. Right? By his when he was 33, he was assassinated. Right? But at his young age, he was very smart, and he just swallowed the whole world, basically, like a leopard. But it says 4 heads. It had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this, I kept looking in the night visions, and behold, a 4th beast, dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong. So, before we go to the dreadful, terrifying beast, leopard with 4 heads. After Alexander the Great was died, there were 4 generals: Lysimachus, Cassander, and Ptolemy, and Seleucus. 4 generals divided up the kingdom. So after Greece, the four rulers, after Alexander the Great, the 4 heads. And from there, later when we study about the history of the intertestamental period, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids give birth to a very, very, very evil Gentile king and ruler named Antiochus IV. And he called himself the manifestation of God. He's the one that caused the Jews to worship with pig, swine blood on their altar, which was made and to be sanctified to give offerings to God. Right? And there came a revolution, the Maccabean revolution, and the Hasmonean dynasty, right? So that dreadful, Antiochus IV is a foreshadowing, many scholars say, of the Antichrist. Now, the dreadful and terrifying and extremely strong beast with large iron teeth. With large iron teeth. Okay. Not much space. Dreadful, terrifying, and what was the other one? Strong. BTS. Yeah. BTS beast. With iron teeth. That can chew up anything. And of course, referring to Rome. After Rome comes, remember the feet of clay? I will call it the nations. Different kings of the nations. Rome is actually had a policy where they accepted many foreigners. Remember, Apostle Saul was a Jew, but which citizenship did he have? Roman citizenship. How is that? It's kind of like, I'm Korean, but I come to Singapore, live a long time, I apply for PR, and then I apply for citizenship. I'm a Korean blood, but now I hold US passport. Right? But back then, nations did not do that. You are Jew only if you're born a Jew. You are Roman if you're, or Greek if you're born Greek. However, Rome started this new policy where even foreigners can hold Roman passport. Roman citizenship. Whether they pay for it or I don't know what was the exact rule. And so Rome became a nation, kind of like US, what they call melting pot. All different nations, races come and live together. So after Rome, many nations were kind of mixed and mingling together and lived together in the nation. So clay and iron living and working together. And after that comes, after the DTS comes, which verse are we on? Verse 8, while I was contemplating, verse 7, crushed and trembled from all the beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. 10 horns. 10 represents multi, many, right? So, and fullness. So these 10 horns represent 10 horns. The 10 kingdoms, so they say, but it's not a literal number. Maybe it is, but it's more of a symbolic number. 10, many nations will be coming after Rome to rule over the nations. And then another horn, verse 8, while I was contemplating the horn, behold, another horn, a little one came up among them. Okay? Another horn. And scholars say that's the Antichrist. And later comes the judgment. Let us now turn to chapter 8. Daniel chapter 8. Then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. Take a wild guess, which one do you think? 2 horns, but one is longer. The bear had 2 feet, but depended on one. Okay? This ram represents ram plus 2 horns. Represents Medo Persia. And then comes verse 4. I saw a ram budding westward, northward, southward, and no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified himself. This is the description of how Medo Persia came and destroyed their north, south, east, and west, and they came from east to west to destroy. And while I was observing, verse 5, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. So, goat. The Greeks were called the goat people. Goats can survive anywhere, right? And goats can eat anything. Do you know that? Basically, you throw anything to goat, they will chew it and eat it. So the goats, or in rough terrain, high mountains, the goats survive. And that's why I believe that's why the Greeks were called the goat people. Maybe they drink goat milk, I don't know. With a conspicuous horn, referring to probably Alexander the Great. And then after that come, excuse me, the 4 horns. Where am I? Verse 6. He came up to the ram that had the 2 horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in his mighty wrath. I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him, and he struck the ram and shattered his 2 horns, and the ram shattered his 2 horns, both Medo and Persia, and ram had no strength to withstand him, so he hurled him to the ground and trampled upon him, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, But soon, as he was mighty, a large horn was broken. Is that true? Alexander the Great, as soon as he conquered, it was broken, right? And in its place there came up 4 conspicuous horns for the 4 winds of heaven. So 4 horns. And verse 9, and let's skip to verse 9. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn which grew exceedingly great toward the south and toward the east and toward the beautiful land. What's the beautiful land? Beulah. Beautiful land is referring to the people of God, right? The Holy Land. It grew up to the host of heaven and caused some of the hosts and some of the stars to fall to the earth and trampled them down. We can go on, but because of the lack of time, we will stop there. But that one last little horn is probably referring to Antiochus IV, but eventually foreshadowing the Antichrist that will stand up against the people of God in the end. Now, this is the introduction. Don't be too sad. Because this is interesting, this is history, but what can we learn out of this? What did God do to these people? What did the people of God do during this time? Just get conquered? Just get ruled over by these 4 nations? Because we're interested because in the end, the beast comes up out of the sea. This is the image of the beast. The image of the beast is 4 nations. And in Genesis chapter 14, this is, you don't have to take it as is, but just for your consideration and observation. Genesis chapter 14, you remember Abraham? His nephew Lot, who was in Sodom, was attacked by allied forces of 4 nations. Shall we turn to that? Genesis chapter 14. And it came about in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar, Arioch, king of Elasar, Kedorlaomer, king of Elam, and Tidal, king of Goim, that they made war with Bera, king of Sodom, and Birsha, king of Gomorrah, Shinab, king of Admah, and Shemember, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, that is Zoar. And Abraham had to come to the rescue. With whom? Abraham comes to the rescue with, how many? 318, right? Where is it? Do you see it? Abraham, and it says,
Verse 14. Verse 14.
verse 15,
14.
14. Abraham heard that his relative had been taken captive, and he led out his trained men, born in his house, 318, and went up in pursuit as far as Dan. Okay? This is Jerusalem, right? This is Israel. This is the Dead Sea and Sea of Galilee. Dan is way up there. And let's say Euphrates River, and around close to the Euphrates River is Dan. Okay? And all the way, Dan is actually over here, and Hova is over here. So, and he takes those who are trained. One is those who are trained. Second is those who are born in Abraham's house. Okay? And he takes them, regardless of the number, he takes them and destroys 4 allied kingdoms. Imagine one kingdom sends one division of army. If one division of army is 10,000 soldiers, that's 40,000 soldiers. I don't know. 318 verses. This is describing, and then where do they go up to? They go all the way up to Hobah, which is by the Euphrates. These 4 kingdoms, some scholars say, this is 4 kings. Okay, Amraphel, king of Shinar. Shinar is where Babylon is. Okay. Arioch, the king of Elasar. Elasar, they believe it would be representing Greece. And then Kedorlaomer, king of Elam. Elam is a city in Persia. Terah, king of Goim. Goim means nations. Rome is described, has the characteristic of having many nations in them. And after Rome came many different horns and nations. And so this war against these 4 kings leads all the way up to Euphrates. The final battle was at the Euphrates, and Abraham pushed them off and gained victory. And then he was coming down and met Melchizedek. Okay? Now, in Revelation chapter 16, the last war will be at where? Which river? Armageddon, which is going to be at Euphrates. I don't know, maybe God is using Abraham to teach us about even the end time. Isaiah chapter 46 tells us, verses 9 and 10 tells us, God declares the end from the beginning. God can speak about Revelation all the way from Genesis. Right? Do you believe that? Then maybe in order for us to gain victory over the 4 kingdoms, the beast that arises from the sea, the beast that tries to take the holy land of God, in order to overcome, God needs whom? People who are trained and children of Abraham, or people who are born in the house of Abraham. What's the house of Abraham? That's what we're studying about, Matthean genealogy. When we speak about Jesus' genealogy, it begins by saying, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Saying, this is the house of David and the house of Abraham. And then Galatians chapter 3, verse 19 and the following. When you believe in Jesus, you will become children of Abraham. And so those who will gain victory over these are the literal kingdoms, but in Revelation, in the end, there will be the 4 kingdoms of this world. Maybe not literal 4 kingdoms right now. I can count maybe some of the names, but maybe they're not. Spiritually, the enemy that Satan will use to try to destroy the people of God. Who will have to go fight against them? It's those who are born and trained in the house of Abraham. I pray and believe that is you. And your families, your churches. May that be the churches in Singapore. Let us pray for them. And finally, even in the midst of this darkness, and they called it the period of darkness, because from Israel's perspective, from Jewish perspective, they were only going through suffering. But even in the midst of that, God was doing work. God used these nations to do His work. Some people say it's the period of darkness because it's a time where there was no prophecy. For about 400 years, no prophet, no prophecy. From the last prophet Malachi all the way to John the Baptist, who came to the wilderness and started of Judea and started to preach, there was silence. And so people said this is a period of darkness because there was silence. No prophecy, no revelation, no teaching. However, even in the midst of that, God was doing His preparation. So even if you think you're going through a doldrum, you're going through a period of silence, God, where are you? Are you listening to my prayers? Why am I going through such hardship after another hardship? Problem on top of another one. Why? But please remember, even in the midst of that, God is doing great work for you, for salvation. What did He do? Through Babylon. Remember, 2 Chronicles, the last chapter 36, verse 21. He tells us the reason why the Israelites were taken as captives. It says, the land needs to rest for 70 years because you cheated on the sabbatical years. What's the sabbatical years? Every 7th year, they need to let the land rest. Right? But they said, hey, and so God said, in the 6th year, I will bless you 3 times. 3 times. So that you can let the land rest on the 7th year. Is that a good deal?
Yes.
Good deal for you or for God? Good deal for us. Right? Why? 6th year you earn. You work the land, you earn. 7th year you don't work. 8th year you work. Right? 8th year is the first year, next first year. So how much gain do you have? Economical minded people. How much gain do you have? You lose 1. 7th year, you lose 1. But God gives you twice. But then 1 was for the 6th year. Second one was for the 7th year. But then He gives 1 more. So you end up with 1 plus. Right? But these, I don't want to say Jews, but because it might sound racist. But these people said, oh, but if we work, even a little bit, if work not so, visibly, but work quietly, okay? Maybe close one eye and work quietly, then we will get at least 1.5 or even 2 plus, right? So they work the land. For how many years? God says, the land needs to rest 70 years. So I take you away for 70 years. Jeremiah chapter 25 tells us that too. Why 70 years? How many sabbatical years did they cheat on the land? It must be 70 years then. How many years is 70 sabbatical years? 70 sabbatical years. 70 times 7, 490 years. That comes from an assumption and some traditional Jewish writings. It's not in the Bible, so I don't quote me on the 490. But at least God says 70 years the land has to rest. So God takes Babylon to punish His own people, teach His people a lesson. This caused the Israelites to start repenting. And Medo Persia, during the time of Cyrus, they started to come back, return to their holy land. Through 3 returns, which we will study later. First return was under King Cyrus. Second return was under his nephew Artaxerxes. And third also under Artaxerxes. Now, what happened at the first return? What would you do if you were away for 70 years from your home and you finally return? Your heart is, I won't make the same mistake. And so what they did is, as soon as they returned, they hired scribes. This is where the scribes came about. They hired scribes. What happened before when they were being taken away? All the Bible, all the scrolls were burnt. So whatever that remains, they made copies. Okay? And it was a holy practice of of making many manuscripts at that time. So the use of scribes came about during that time. And then they said, let us be holy. Let us make sure we abide by the law. And so these very orthodox and conservative, law-abiding Jews came about, and they're called Hasidim. In the New Testament times, they were called the Pharisees. So the Pharisees that were always persecuting Jesus about not keeping the law, they came about during this time. But at least the Jews started to read the Word of God again, read the Scriptures again. They wanted to abide by the law, and they were looking for and waiting for the Messiah. And then another thing that happened when they were returning, not everybody came back. Only a portion of them came back. Even now, there are many Jews all around the world. Why? Because at that time, they were dispersed. And this is called diaspora. Not only during the Holocaust times, but during this time, the Jews, Cyrus had a policy where you're free to move around. You're free to move to different places. As long as you're under my empire, you speak my language, you can speak yours also. But you have to speak my language first. Right? And so he gave some freedom for their culture. So they spread around, and what did they do? The Jews, wherever they went, they built synagogues. That's why there's synagogues all around the world from this time. And so, where did Jesus teach? Where did Apostle Paul teach? Synagogues. Right? And so God was preparing for the time of Jesus already. Another thing, during the third return, or during this time, the common language that was spoken throughout the empire. Remember, Cyrus said, you can speak your language as long as you speak my language. What was my language? Aramaic. Aramaic, which was very close to Hebrew. Right? So Aramaic was the common language during that time. So even during the time of Jesus, people were speaking Aramaic. Right? Although, during the time of Jesus, the common language was Greek. Kind of like Singapore. The common language, the first language here is English, but when I go buy something, the first thing they say, Chinese. Right? So during that time, officially Greek was the official language, but then many people still spoke Aramaic. So the book of Daniel, book of Esther, parts of these Bibles are written in Aramaic rather than Hebrew. And then through Greece, not so much time, but through Greece, Alexander the Great was not only great in terms of conquering, but he was great in terms of getting into people's minds. Greece was like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, America. Everybody had American dream. Everybody had, back then, Greek dream, right? If a Greek person did something, everybody wanted to do that, right? Kind of like the way Americans dress. Everybody, even Asians that don't fit into those clothing, they wanted to do that. The Americans did their hair like that. Everybody in the world wanted to do the hair like that, right? Same thing. Okay? Everybody wanted to follow the Greek way. Everybody wanted to learn the Greek language. Right? So the culture spread out. And then Greek philosophy. Greek philosophy is something that is very interesting. The Logos philosophy, Stoic philosophy, different kinds of philosophies came from Greek influence and Roman influence. One of the Hellenistic Greek the word Greek can be replaced with Hellenistic, right? Hellenistic philosophy. One of them is dualism. Before that, they just thought this idol had divinity. But the Greeks separated. No, there's spirit, divine, and the physical. So the Greeks, although they were not really biblical all the time and Christians, but they had this dualism. So they separated, they put a distinction between spiritual and physical, which helped the Christians understand the spiritual aspect and the physical aspect. Okay? Though I said, for the sake of convenience, I said the Logos philosophy, or because the Logos is, they believe Logos was in between the spirit and flesh. A bridge between spiritual world and fleshly world. Remember, Jesus is John says Logos. In the beginning was the Logos. Logos was with God and Logos was God. And he came down in the flesh, and that is Jesus Christ. Logos can be both spiritual and physical. And so that helped the Jews and the Israelites, the people during the time, understand the concept of Jesus very well. How can spirit be on this earth? How can human being be God? No, Logos can be. Logos is a bridge. It can be the spiritual world, but explained in this physical world. That has a Hellenistic influence. And lastly, Rome. Two things. Rome was known for road system. Okay? What's that saying? All roads lead to Rome, right? Because Rome had very good road system. Guess who used it the most effectively? Apostle Paul. Apostle Paul. If he did not have the Roman roads, he would not have evangelized so broadly and so many churches. The second is what is called Pax Romana. Under Rome, everybody's in peace. As long as you're under the empire of Rome, it's in peace. Rome's regime was so strong, everybody under them don't fight each other. Right? And because that means crossing borders was much easier under Rome. Because everybody's under Rome. It's kind of like going to Malaysia as a Singaporean. That is much easier than South Korean going to North Korea. Right? Under Rome, there's peace. And so Apostle Paul, with Roman citizenship, with kind of like that red Singaporean passport. You flash it, you go anywhere in the world. Not much visa needed. Right? Likewise, Apostle Paul was able to go everywhere, speak the same language, and everybody understands. God uses the difficult times to prepare for even brighter days, and for His work, and for the proclamation of His word. Please remember, even though we might be going through difficult times, through that difficult time, God is preparing so that He can use us even further, even in greater ways to proclaim His word. Amen? Let us pray.